army vehicles. Afterwards, we could see the armored vehicle on fire in the video, which next to armed men praising their success. It was something like acknowledgement of what has been done and by separatist fighters. Later, in the other more shocking video, we saw a body cut into pieces, scattered body of soldier, which was reflecting the violence of the attack and the explosion of the vehicle by rocket launcher. And subsequently, the video could be geolocalized at the rise of Sakba in Bamising. It is in the department of Ngoketunja in northwest region. One of the commander of this armed men is called General Nopiti, was noticed proudly displaying his weapon and displaying his victory at the end of this violent attack. He was very pleased to say that at least more than 15 soldiers have been killed. And it was not until yesterday, Monday, September 20th, that we have heard from the official reaction of the Minister of Defense of Cameroon on what happened that day. Indeed, according to the statement of the Minister of Defense, a set of B Rapid Intervention Unit was going on reconnaissance mission, and they were targeted by a violent ambush attack by heavily armed terrorists in Bamising in the district of Ndop. It is in the northwest region. And according to the minister, the communique is saying that they use an improvised explosive device and an anti-tank rocket launcher. The insurgents immobilized the vehicle of the defense forces before opening heavy fire on the latter, who were seriously incapacitated by the detonation of the explosive charge. Those events are occurring barely a few days after another improvised explosive devices attack on another military convoy on the morning of Sunday, 12 September 2021, in the Kumbo-Tatum axis, in the same region, in the Bui division, northwest region of Cameroon. What also, the thing that we can say more is that it is clear that the situation has been very tense on the ground since the resurgence of violent attacks in that part of the country. Wars, both regions now are blocked by call of ghost town. It has become very difficult to get in those places without use of the military convoy to bring you, to convey you where you are supposed to go. So
right,
to show how the situation has become.
All right. Okay. We appreciate that update. Thank you very much for joining us, Kwam Joel Honore, joining us from Douala in Cameroon. So let's take you back to our lead story this hour in Sudan. And authorities there have reported a failed coup attempt by a group of soldiers. According to the authorities, the military remains in control. Sudan state-run television called on the public to counter that attempt. We're now joined by our CGTN correspondent in Khartoum, Sudan, Naba Mohideen. Naba, what more do we know about this failed coup?
Hello. Yes, there is news about a failed military coup, but there is no deployment. There is no military deployment, only heavy vehicles in front of the military headquarters. Some streets were very difficult to access, but the movement now is easy, and people, and there is no statement by the military, there is no formal statement, only reports fighting about the failed military coup, and people reacting to it considered not reliable information, because only in this year there was 4 failed military coups due to the sources, but in reality there is no heavy vehicles, there is no blockade or block for the streets or bridges as always. And also in the report they say they stopped 40 officers in their way to take down to take over the building of the TV, the national TV broadcast. But there is no details about their names, their ranks, their military units. So for now, it's just news, and there is no confirmation. The military didn't confirm or deny the news.
And we've also seen reports that the military was earlier on deployed in the streets in Khartoum. What is the situation there right now?
Actually, as I said earlier, there is no real deployment. Only heavy vehicles in front of the military headquarters, which is a routine for a while. Since after of al-Bashir, the military is doing a routine by blocking some streets in some days where there is tensions or news or scams, about tensions or something like this. But in the streets, the movement is easy. The bridges are open. The streets are open. There is no any deployment of heavy vehicles or something like this. And all of Khartoum is very calm and accessible for citizens. And we only see this failed military coup in the news.
All right, Naba, thank you for that update. Naba Mohideen joining us on the phone from Khartoum in Sudan. ECOWAS has given Guinea's military junta 6 months to transition the country back to democratic rule. In a coup earlier this month, an elite army unit ousted President Alpha Condé and dissolved both government and the constitution. The junta now calls itself the National Committee for Rally and Development of Guinea, or CRND. Our reporter in Conakry, Desiree Cannon, went to meet the Guinean people to get their views on the issue of transition.
How long should the transition period in Guinea last? This is the question that currently interests the Guinean people.
The transitional period indicated by ECOWAS is short to allow the different parties to negotiate. In reality, everyone knows that it is impossible to organize elections within 6 months from now. ECOWAS knows this very well. However, this proposal by ECOWAS will lead the CNRD to react and certainly make another proposal.
It is true that the junta should not stay in power forever, but I do not agree with the 6-month deadline given by ECOWAS. There are many things that need to be settled beforehand. For example, we need to have a charter of the constitution. We need to form a government.
The Guinean people also spoke out about the junta's refusal to allow President Alpha Condé to leave the country on ECOWAS orders.
According to information in our possession, President Alpha Condé would like to stay here in Guinea. We will not want to hear about exile. These are elements that we must take into account and make concrete proposals because ECOWAS cannot decide for us.
I think the junta's refusal to let Alpha Condé go into exile is wise. He should stay in his country, because to this day, Alpha Condé does not recognize his removal from office, and letting him go into exile could be a threat. He must stay here until Guinea regains stability, and then he must be left free. We will need him in any case as a former president and a resource person.
Consultations initiated by the National Committee for Rally and Development, CNRD, with political, economic and diplomatic actors, regional coordinations and other figures will end on Tuesday. Proposals resulting from this meeting could certainly provide guidance on the transition timetable. Desiree Cannon, CGTN, Conakry, Guinea.
A Chinese envoy has called for multilateralism at the UN Human Rights Council. Chen Shu says a democratic and equitable international order is essential to the protection of human rights.
Remain open and inclusive, respect the diversity of civilizations and the development paths independently chosen by countries, and refrain from imposing one's own social system and model to others.
Speaking on behalf of a group of countries, Chen also called on all nations to uphold the principles of universality and impartiality in the field of human rights. He said all parties should refrain from politicizing human rights issues and should work together to build a community with a shared future for humanity. Nearly 40 Chinese and foreign social organizations have submitted a written statement to the United Nations Human Rights Council. They say the right to development is a fundamental human right. The statement calls for the international community to promote the cause of human rights, especially in developing countries. It says social organizations will continue to advocate the common values of peace and freedom for all mankind and promote sustainable development and international solidarity. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson hosted a roundtable of world leaders to address climate change. The closed-door meeting took place Monday during the annual UN General Assembly. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres and world leaders discussed lingering policy gaps at the government level. Sarah Walton has more from New York.
On Monday morning, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson convened an informal roundtable of leaders to discuss climate change. Now, this was a closed meeting, so there were no cameras or press or public allowed inside, but the Prime Minister spoke afterwards to reveal what had been said. He said that leaders of developing countries such as Bangladesh spoke and set out very starkly some of the devastating impacts of climate change that they see every day. But the United States did not take part in the meeting, and the Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, was far more cautious when he spoke after the meeting. He said that under current pledges, the amount of greenhouse gas emissions around the world is actually due to increase rather than decrease by 2030. And he said that unless there were big and bold pledges from world leaders, the upcoming major climate summit due to take place in Scotland in November, COP26, is at risk of being a failure. Also on the agenda here at the UN is discussions on COVID-19. There are some concerns by the City of New York that the gathering of world leaders here over the next week could turn this into a COVID-19 super spreader event. There is a vaccine mandate in New York whereby you must prove that you are vaccinated to go into many public buildings. However, the UN has said that they will not be asking world leaders to show proof of vaccination. And across the road from the UN, the City of New York has set up a mobile vaccination and testing site where no matter where in the world you're from, if you are taking part in the United Nations General Assembly, you can go and get a vaccine against COVID-19 for free. Well, as I said, the first day of the high-level debate kicks off on Tuesday, and there are some big names for that first day. Most people will be watching first off Joe Biden, who will be giving his first address to the UN as President of the United States. He's expected to talk about his plans to return the United States to the forefront of international relations, really setting himself apart from his predecessor, Donald Trump, who railed against multilateralism in his speeches here at the UN General Assembly. However, Joe Biden will be speaking against the backdrop of a number of incidents in recent weeks that have tarnished the US image in that respect, namely the withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan and the AUKUS nuclear submarine deal with Australia that has now led to a diplomatic spat with France. Also, people will be paying close attention to the address from President Xi Jinping of China. Now, a bit of a surprise, we had been expecting a message from the Deputy Prime Minister at the weekend, but instead we're going to be hearing from the President himself in a pre-recorded message. Sarah Walton, CGTN, New York.
The COVID-19 pandemic has thrown off many developing countries chasing sustainable development goals set by the United Nations. This includes SDG 8, which targets decent work and economic growth. In South Africa, the pandemic has slowed the economy and unemployment has rocketed to the highest in the world as the country was locked down. CGTN's Julie Shire takes a look at the jobless situation.
Louis Subaso was born poor. He dropped out of school and joined a life of drugs and crime, desperate to escape his circumstances.
We didn't have lunch to carry at school. I never went to school trips, so I started to hang around with bad company or with bad people, or I would say, Then because of that, and then I was involved in criminal activities.
Basu turned his life around after being arrested for attempted murder, but found it difficult to land a job.
The rejection you get, as soon as they see your CV, they say that no, we are not. They don't even want to hear your story, and they say no, we are not hiring. So the disappointment, the rejection, like that feeling of being rejected, and the disappointments, the discouragement, because you won't be able to wake up tomorrow and go search for other jobs.
He eventually gave up the search and started his own food business.
I went to door, telling them that I have this thing, the quotation. I want to buy these equipments. I need this much. What can I do for you? I can paint your house. I can wash your windows. So that's where I started to. That's why I get the money to buy the equipments. Then 2017 I started this business.
Basu's plight is similar to that faced by millions of South Africans. COVID-19 and an outbreak of violence and looting has worsened the situation, throwing South Africa's poverty alleviation targets off track.
If you look at the two affected provinces, for an example, when it comes to looting, these are the biggest provinces, firstly, when it comes to population. At the same time, there's also the backbone of the South African economy. So the fact that they themselves have experienced this level of instability, it means that the economy as a whole is going to pay a price.
South Africa has widened its social safety net to help people get by, but it does little to curb the long-term effects.
They are really unsustainable. Of course, you bring in the issue of free education too. A good idea, it opens the doors of learning. But if you look at the economy that we have, many of these young people are then unemployed, and then they have to sit at home with no source of income.
The COVID-19 pandemic has meant a serious strain on resources with little time to focus on achieving sustainable development goals. South Africa's unemployment rate has been pushed up to the highest in the world. People here are getting poorer every day. Eradicating poverty completely in the next 9 years will be a tall order. Julie Shara, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
Coming up to 20 minutes into the hour, you're watching Africa Live. Let's take a short break coming up. Nigeria imposes a communications blackout to contain attacks in Sokoto State. And Uganda receives over 1.6 million doses of the Pfizer vaccines from the United States.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg,
Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The Taliban have announced the remaining cabinet members of Afghanistan's new government, with no women added to the all-male lineup. They also said girls would soon be allowed to return to school. Zmarilai Abbasin has more from Kabul.
There were several issues that Taliban acting Deputy Minister for Information was appointing to. First of all, he said, announced the rest of the cabinet, many other members, and he said now it's including other ethnics and tribes of the country, including the Hazaras, were not happy with the formation of the government because they were not seeing their own representative, and he said it's now included. And he also talked about the women political partnership in the country, and he said that you will also see that women will be participating in the governmental affairs very soon. Mainly, there were three major issues that he was appointing: the looming economic catastrophe and controlling the financial issues of the country through the government that the Taliban have already formed. And the second one is the participation of the women and their education and job and other issues relating to the women's rights. And the third issue was the freezed assets of Afghanistan and the money that's frozen by the international community, more than $9 billion. And he was answering this. In regard to the main concerns of the women and girls of Afghanistan, particularly regarding to the schools, Zabihullah Mujahid said that it will soon be solved. They're working on the regulations and it will soon be resumed, but we are still focusing on this. The women and girls should not have any concerns in this regard. And he also said that it was not now, because the government is just formed and it's just days now, the people should wait.
Meanwhile, the acting Prime Minister of the Taliban interim government has met with the head of the World Health Organization. WHO Chief Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said the organization will continue supporting Afghanistan's health system to prevent the country from sliding into a humanitarian disaster. He added the WHO will bring its staff back to the country and do its best to increase donations. Acting Prime Minister Malha Hassan Akund thanked the WHO for the assistance. Nigerian authorities have imposed a communications blackout in Sokoto State and several parts of the country's northwest region. On Monday, government said it was trying to crack down against armed kidnappers in the terrorized area. Over the past year, abductions have been on the rise in the northwestern parts of Nigeria. Armed gangs known locally as bandits have kidnapped more than 1,000 students from schools and taking others from hospitals, homes and roads. Zamfara State has been one of the worst hit states by the wave of mass abductions. Many of the bandits seek lucrative ransom payments. Two Russian police officers who responded to a university shooting in the city of Perm will be nominated for a state award. The Interior Ministry says a senior police lieutenant, Vladimir Makarov, evacuated people. Junior police lieutenant Konstantin Kalinin went straight to the university building. There, he found the gunman who had already killed 6 people and wounded 24. Stuart Smith reports from Moscow.
According to the Interior Ministry, police officer Konstantin Kalinin demanded the shooter drop the weapon, but the attacker failed to obey and shot in his direction. Kalinin shot back, wounding but not killing the 18-year-old attacker before providing first aid. The gunman remains in hospital in critical condition. On his social media profile before the shooting, the first-year student at Perm State University, located about 1,300 kilometers east of Moscow, said he was not a terrorist, had no religious or political ideologies, and was not part of an extremist organisation. A spokesperson for the Interior Ministry said the police officers' decisive, competent and harmonious actions prevented more serious consequences and new victims. President Putin sent his condolences to the families of the deceased, and Germany, Israel and Belarus have sent messages of support. The authorities in Perm say they will offer the families of those killed the equivalent of $14,000. Shootings at educational facilities aren't common in Russia, with the last in May this year and before that in 2019. Part of the reason is that gun licenses are hard to get, but in his social media post, the shooter bragged about having lied during the psychological evaluation and did own the gun legally. Stuart Smith, CGTN, Moscow.
Uganda has received over 1.6 million doses of the Pfizer vaccines from the United States government. The East African country is one of many African nations struggling to find vaccines for its population. Leon Senyange has more.
It's the largest single consignment of vaccines received by Uganda. The donation is part of the U.S. government's global efforts to fight the COVID-19 pandemic. The arrival of Pfizer vaccines is expected to supplement the ongoing vaccination exercise in the country. Early this month, Uganda received over 647,000 doses of the Moderna vaccines. Since the pandemic last year, the United States has provided approximately $110 million to Uganda in direct assistance, specifically to respond to COVID-19. Uganda has so far administered over 1.7 million doses throughout its COVID-19 vaccination campaign that started in March this year. The vaccines have majorly been administered to priority groups that include teachers, medical personnel and forces servicemen. The country plans to vaccinate 22 million people by next year. Leon Senyange, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
More than 200 South Sudanese people educated in China have formed a new South Sudan-China Alumni Association. The members of the group say they intend to apply the knowledge and skills acquired from their studies at various Chinese universities to benefit South Sudan. CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports.
More than 200 South Sudanese students have graduated from Chinese education courses in the past 10 years. Beijing continues to award scholarships to South Sudanese students pursuing university education to study in China. Those that have now returned home have formed the South Sudan-China Alumni Association. China's ambassador to South Sudan says Beijing will continue supporting development of human capital in the country.
All alumni are active in all walks of life in South Sudan and have the responsibility of constructing your country and serving your people. I hope you will show the spirit gained from studying in China. Having learned the Chinese saying of taking the public interests into first consideration.
South Sudan's government says the formation of the South Sudan-China Alumni Association is a culmination of strong bilateral relations between the two countries.
China has contributed enormously infrastructure-wise, health-wise. The recent one, as you know, we receive a lot of PPEs to fight the COVID. You know of the major infrastructure development that's happening across the country. And also South Sudan, as a being 10-year-old country, we are not just receiving, we are also contributing to China through multilateral system.
South Sudan supplies China 30,000 barrels of crude oil per day. That oil money is used by China for infrastructural development, including building roads in the East African country, further strengthening relations between the two countries. Some of the students who benefited from the Chinese government scholarship are also involved in road construction being carried out by Chinese government in South Sudan. Others say the education they acquired is helping them train colleagues, especially in the petroleum sector.
Training us as professionals in different fields indicates that the plan for both South Sudan and China is for centuries and generations to come.
China continues to provide scholarships in several academic fields, including petroleum, legal and managerial sectors. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
You're watching Africa Live. Coming up in business news. Egyptian companies to lead reconstruction efforts in Libya. And the US to exempt fully vaccinated visitors from quarantine requirements.
It's just taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Egypt's President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi has officially declared his country's interest in hosting the United Nations COP27 summit scheduled for 2022. Egypt is offering to host the climate change conference on behalf of the African continent. Sisi said it would work to make the conference a radical turning point in international climate efforts in coordination with all parties for the benefit of Africa and the entire world. This year's conference, COP26, will be hosted by the United Kingdom in Glasgow in November. Egypt and Libya have inked 14 memorandum of understanding and 6 agreements in multiple fields. According to the agreement, Egyptian companies will lead the reconstruction process in Libya, which has been marred by violence and infighting in the last decade. From Cairo, here's Yasser Hakim with the details.
It's a milestone in relations between the two North African neighbors that could go a long way in helping rebuild the war-stricken Libyan state. Authorities in Tripoli say the deals signed in Cairo amount to about $19 billion and will be financed by the Libyan Central Bank.
We all know that Libya has a completely damaged infrastructure, education and health systems, and others since the NATO attacks in 2011. And it is now a remnant of a state that requires rebuilding. We will need the Egyptian expertise and labor, especially now that Egypt has revolutionized its construction and infrastructure sectors and the economy in general.
The 20 agreements cover a wide range of projects, building power stations, highways, housing, infrastructure, as well as projects in oil and gas, renewable energy, aviation, agriculture, and more. All this will be conducted by Egyptian companies.
There are now many huge companies in Egypt that have experience in developing projects in all fields. They have been in the forefront of our successful developmental process and will be transferring their experience to establish projects that will achieve all the hopes and ambitions of the Libyan people soon.
Egypt would also benefit from these deals by creating investment opportunities for its companies, more jobs for Egyptian workers in Libya, and a new revenue stream. However, some experts warn it could be a bumpy road ahead.
These agreements are hinging on the security situation in Libya. The agreements remain only pen on paper. As long as Libya is not stable and secure, as long as the political process is not going on the right track to hold elections in December, to disarm militias and deport mercenaries, I fear if this is not achieved, then the agreements will not become a reality on the ground.
But the Libyan interim prime minister had a message of support to all those involved in the agreement.
We demand the ministers in both governments and the companies to work hard to actualize the MOUs and contracts signed here into a reality in the next few weeks, and we will not hesitate as Libyan people, myself personally, and the Egyptian Prime Minister in providing all necessary support to make your mission a success.
And in a sign of intent, meetings in the Egyptian capital saw the relaunch of the joint Egyptian-Libyan Higher Committee after a 12-year suspension. It will be monitoring the progress of these projects and tackle any obstacles that stand in the way. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari has ordered that the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation be incorporated to become a public liability company soon. It's part of efforts to privatize the petroleum company after a historic petroleum bill was signed last month by the president. CGTN's Phili Haza reports from the country's capital, Abuja.
President Buhari, who is also Nigeria's petroleum minister, appointed the board members, including Ifeanyi Ararume, as NNPC chairman and its current chief executive officer, Mele Kyari, to continue to head the firm and steer to this new direction. The new incorporation is meant to see NNPC sell its shares to the public to raise more capital in a few years. The incorporation becomes mandatory as required by the Petroleum Industrial Act that was signed by President Buhari last month after 20 years of deliberation. The move by the president is part of efforts by the government to revamp the oil industry in Nigeria and convert a government-run company to a public liability entity. This is towards ensuring more transparency and productivity, as well as curtailing years of mismanagement and corruption. Before now, the oil firm has barely made much profit after 44 years of operation. According to Buhari, NNPC made its first profit last month after making losses of up to $2 billion in 2018. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
Tunisia has posted a 7.5% jump in tourism receipts in the first 8 months of the year. Authorities say improved ways to deal with the pandemic have been one of the reasons for the steady recovery of the vital tourism sector. CGTN's Adnet Shawashi has more on this report from Tunis.
Tourism officials in Tunisia say they have recorded several positive indicators that show signs of recovery after a pandemic-induced slowdown battered the crucial industry. Tunisia's acting Minister of Tourism, Habib Hammar, noted that the successful national vaccination drive targeting employees in the industry is stimulating recovery of the sector, which accounts for more than 10% of its GDP.
The success of the vaccination operation has had a positive impact on tourism activity in Tunisia. The vaccination drive included all professionals and employees in the tourism industry. This includes all those who are in direct contact with clients in hotels, tourist resorts, travel agencies, restaurants, tourist guides, and people working in museums. We've succeeded in protecting our professionals as well as the tourists.
The number of overnight stays edged up 8.2% to 4.8 million during the first 8 months of 2021. This rise was boosted by domestic tourism as overnights spent by Tunisians climbed by nearly 20% to 2.8 million overnight stays, against a 4.7% fall in the number of foreign tourists.
The vaccination has given professionals in the tourism industry the energy to work in a safe environment. In addition to foreign tourists, more and more domestic tourists are staying at hotels because they know that the health protocol is respected and the persons they will meet are vaccinated.
Tunisian tourism syndicates have encouraged the vaccination drive for some 600,000 workers in the vital industry. Experts say this operation has allowed hotel owners to preserve thousands of jobs.
We are at risk of contracting the virus. The vaccine saves lives and saves jobs as well. Tourism has been hit hard since the outbreak of the pandemic. Now there are new opportunities in the tourism industry.
The number of arrivals to the Tunisian borders were down by 7.1% to 1.5 million persons, due to the 38.7% drop in the number of travelers from the Maghreb region. Nevertheless, the number of European tourists rose by 20% despite the travel ban imposed by several countries to the North African destination. According to the Commissioner for Tourism in the coastal city of Hammamet, tourist arrivals at this Mediterranean resort posted a 14.6% rise in July and August compared to the same period last year. Tunisia's domestic tourists have the lion's share, followed by tourists from Russia, while those from the French markets rank it third. Aden Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
The White House says people who are not U.S. citizens but plan to travel to the U.S. must provide proof of vaccination and a negative test result taken within 3 days of departure. Fully vaccinated passengers will be exempt from quarantine upon arrival. The new policy will end a number of pandemic bans imposed by the former Trump administration on travel from 33 countries. The tourism industry has welcomed the news as it has been lobbying the federal government to make the changes. At the same time, the Centers for Disease Control plans to roll out more stringent contact tracing requirements in the coming weeks, including information on phone numbers and email addresses of U.S.-bound international travelers. European Union foreign ministers have voiced solidarity with France in its dispute with Australia for scrapping a submarine contract. Officials spoke on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly in New York on Monday. Australia announced a new security arrangement with the US and UK last week and said it will cancel its order of French conventional submarines and instead build 8 nuclear-powered submarines using American and British technology. US President Joe Biden will speak on the phone with French President Emmanuel Macron in a few days' time to reduce tensions with its NATO ally. Meanwhile, France has asked for explanations from the United States over the submarine deal. Foreign Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian called it a unilateral move and breach of trust between partners at a news conference in New York.
Yes, it is a disappointment. Without unilateralism, unpredictability, brutality, and not respecting your partner was part of the past, but it continues. So we want to understand, because the basic principle within partners is that we are allies. We talk and don't hide elaborate different strategies. And this is the reason why there is a crisis in confidence beyond the fact that the contract is being broken.
Still on the matter, the fallout from Australia's broken submarine deal with France may complicate negotiations on an Australian-European Union free trade deal. Greg Navarro reports from Sydney.
This will be a very tricky week for Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison, who has to navigate between furthering the security alliance with the United States and trying to repair damage by the announcement that Australia was scrapping a deal with a French company to build a fleet of submarines. Now, in fact, Morrison addressed the latter, saying that you would have to be naive. This is when he first arrived in the United States on Monday. You'd have to be naive not to expect France to react angrily to all of this. He's referring to an announcement earlier this month that Australia was in fact pulling out of a 90 billion Australian dollar deal with a French company to build a fleet of attack-class submarines, instead opting to go with a fleet of nuclear-powered submarines, relying on technology that was being lent from the United States. Now, pulling out of that French deal has apparently cost Australia about 2 billion Australian dollars. That's money Australia will not get back. It has also put a free trade agreement that Australia was trying to hammer out with the European Union in jeopardy. Remember that France plays a significant role, has significant influence in the European Union when it comes to trade issues. There are also concerns here in Australia that the move will further incur more economic sanctions from China. Indonesia also not happy with this move. It's expressed concern, saying that it could very well inflame tensions within the region. Now, Morrison will finish up his U.S. trip at the end of the week by meeting with Quad leaders. They'll do this for the first time face-to-face. That's the leaders from India, Australia, Japan, and the United States. They're scheduled to talk about a variety of topics, including regional security. Greg Navarro, CGTN, Sydney.
You're watching Africa Live. Coming up in sports. Countries scramble to qualify for the ICC Africa T20 Cricket World Cup.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment